Thank you, and I'll kick it off and then hand it over to the true wisdom of the group in a minute. That's that. Yeah, it'll go. Thank you for letting us be here, and it's always fun for us to get out and have conversations with people in the public and get input. It is so critical. Greenville is a very special place in that we do I think, an excellent job in getting input from the community and listening to the community. I hope we're known as a listening community. And thank you, Mill Village, for facilitating some of these conversations. They're critically important. As we're talking about inclusionary zoning, it's very important to get a foundation of how we got here. Yasha especially will appreciate the importance of knowing our history and learning our history and learning from our mistakes, which we have many. When we talk about inclusionary zoning, it's also important to consider what the opposite of that is, which is exclusionary zoning. We have a sordid history in how we deal with people, how we deal with zoning and our issues. It goes back to the early 1900s. For example, in New York passed the very first city zoning ordinance in 1916. And that ordinance was created under the guise of improving the community, but when you dig deeply into it, it was an exclusionary zoning ordinance. Some might argue, some of my fellow academicians might argue with me on that. But what it was created for is to exclude people from being in certain places in New York. There was a zone that was created, for example, that did not allow laundries. That was specifically targeted at the Chinese American population. So they could not live in the communities, in those communities in the boroughs of New York. Additionally, Greenville has a history of exclusionary zoning as well. When we look at in 1912, we passed a Greenville exclusionary housing ordinance. That's what it's called. And I will read the ordinance to you. Our city council was very wise. Ordinance for preserving peace, preventing conflict and ill feelings between the white and colored races in the city of Greenville, and promoting the general welfare of the city by providing, so far as practicable, for the use of separate blocks for residences, churches, schools, hotels, boarding houses. I can't read my writing. Places of public where people are, stores and places of business for all. It was a ordinance to separate race. Yeah. And it's still on the books in certain places within Greenville. For example, there's still houses in Greenville that have deed restrictions that do not allow white people to sell their houses to blacks. And it's still on the books. It's not enforceable, but it's really important to remember that history and to remember how we got here. We're still living with some of these problems and some of these issues. I'm very excited about what Wendell is working through with the legislature. It's been there for a while. Yeah. But inclusionary zoning is one of the many tools that us planners and zoners have available to help make communities better. If you look at Greenville County, for example, 60% of Greenville County is unzoned. That means you can put whatever you want in many parts of Greenville County, primarily the northern part and the southern part of the county. I am hopeful that our county council will continue to consider placing zoning in these places. As we look in inclusionary zoning, and I'm going longer than I told you I was. When we look in inclusionary zoning, it is one of the tools that planners have to ensure that we have affordable housing, we have places where people can live throughout the city. It's one of the few tools that we have as a city to ensure that, and also to require that developers make sure they have mixed uses within new developments. A couple of good examples of what we're doing. The Woven, although very controversial, is a project just a block away where we're putting in 20% affordable. The key though is making sure that affordable and market rate are mixed, where you don't know on the surface, you don't know which units are which. And it's like the affordable units don't have a separate back door and things like that. But that is a great example. We're doing tax incentives for the Delano at Unity Park. Also, we have 8.5 acres in Unity Park that we're putting affordable housing in. Most of it is 100% affordable, but we're also doing some mixed market rate as well. So the city is on top of this, and I hope other cities will follow. I hope other cities in South Carolina will watch us and learn from us. Although we're not the best at it, we're working at it, and hopeful that we can continue to do inclusionary zoning. Inclusionary zoning is not legal for an entire district yet, and that's what Wendell's working on. We can do inclusionary zoning, and really not call it that, but we're doing that by giving incentives, we're giving density bonuses. If people put in affordable, we're doing, for example, in many areas, we limit the height to 5 stories. If you put in affordable, we're letting you do 7. So we're well on the way of trying to make sure these things work. We have a housing crisis in this county, and we've got to address it, and we have to address it now. So, Wendell.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Before I describe my bill, I just want us to be mindful of this, that what legislation does, legislation creates a narrative about our state. We're sending messages in terms of the folks that are in the state, but also the folks that are considering to come to our state, folks that are considering investing in our state. And what I want inclusionary zoning, the message that I wanted to send is that, yes, South Carolina is very much so open for investment. We want people to consider our state to be a place to come, to relocate their businesses, for developers to come and help us grow. But also by adding inclusionary zoning, it is our admission, as you just said, that we do realize that we have a housing crisis. We want to grow, but we don't want to continue to disenfranchise the people who made this state great. And so what this bill states, it follows very similar patterns that other legislators have attempted by offering inclusionary zoning. And that says that gives a framework for our municipalities and our counties to tell developers that we want you here, but when you're building a project of 5 units or greater, we want to give you incentives. We're not mandating. That will not fly in this state. That word will not fly. We are asking that you set aside up to 30% of those units and deem those as affordable. That is 80% of AMI or lower. Now, where we fall on the AMI, the state will cap it at 80%. The municipalities and counties can come under that however they deem necessary. So it's still respecting home rule, giving some room for you guys to tweak it as you wish. But that's an incentive to keep that in mind, that yes, come, let's build here in Greenville, but we do have a certain percentage of this populace that are struggling to find homes. And I think Russell, last count was like 22,000 units. Yeah. So 22,000 units short. So it's not a problem, it's a crisis. And so we're asking them to make sure that they do just that. Now, that's the normal approach to inclusionary housing. And as you can see, we haven't made much traction. So what I decided to do to tweak it a little bit, my bill is called the South Carolina residential and education opportunity. So I through education. Here's what I mean by that. What I'm suggesting, which I think I can get my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to give great consideration to, is that, well, let's just address the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is that there's often pushback on what we do with our tax dollars, and often labeled as the core functions of government. And so there are quite a few restrictions on what members of the other side of the aisle want to do with tax dollars. But my bill states this, that we're not trying to create a permanent situation. We're not trying to, quote unquote, expand the welfare state. What we're doing is trying to create a bridge to self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency is my ultimate goal, because if you ask anybody in my district, they're smart enough to know they can't depend on us forever. Because what we can do for them changes with the wind, what we can do with them changes with the leadership or the majority or the minority, what have you. And so the educational piece says this, that if you do qualify for the 30% of housing or whatever percentage is there, we also want to begin to steer those individuals to applying for our workforce development scholarships in their particular areas. And our technical schools are fantastic. And we want to steer in the direction of some employment that is the higher paid employment in your respective counties to move you in the direction of self-sufficiency. So after 1 year of being in housing, we're asking that you plug into the technical system, find a particular trade to become certified in. You get up to 4 years then to complete that. And then after those 4 years, you're asked to begin to look for a job that brings you up to market rate standards. And once you have that job, we want you to vacate the property to find market rate housing, freeing that house, freeing that apartment up for the next family to come along to begin to engage in that same process. So as you can see, it addresses the immediate need of housing, because it is what it is, but it also begins to promote self-sufficiency. So individuals won't have to continue to depend on subsidized housing, but move them in the direction where they're able to find employment in their respective counties from whatever industries are paying the most. And so that latter part of the bill, I think I'm biased because I wrote it, but it's a very sellable portion of the bill to those who normally resist inclusionary zoning. So hopefully once we get a hearing, we can gain some traction.
Wendell, I'm interested. There's been a bill in the House, an inclusionary zoning bill in the House for several years now. First of all, what happened with that? And how is your bill different from the one that basically died?
Like many bills, they die in committee. Is the bill that got the most attention was on the Senate side, with Senator Marlon Kimpson. And so it is sitting in committee, has yet to get a hearing. And so I used his framework, but I added the educational piece, because the part that I left out, guys, was that the persons that qualify for housing, if they are deemed able-bodied, those individuals are placed in the pipeline trying to get higher education so they can attain higher employment. And so that's the difference. That's the main difference to this bill, by combining both of those. And again, it ties into, Russell, what we're promoting. We have a tremendous amount of emphasis on workforce development. So we're satisfying that need as well. Satisfying the immediate need of housing, but it's also satisfying the long-term need of workforce development.
That's perfect. I handed out a sheet of basically a inclusionary zoning 101 sheet that you can take with you. One of the challenges, one of the challenges, at least within the city, is the price of land. And because the land costs are so high, developers have given us great pushback in doing inclusionary zoning and doing affordable housing. And also, I mean, they're saying that if you're making us do affordable housing That's going to increase the price of market rate housing. But at the same time, we've got to find ways to make it equally as profitable for the developer and equally as compelling for the developer to do affordable as to do market rate, which is a great challenge. But I think through Wendell's bill, we can solve some of those issues and create partnerships to solve this crisis.
Exactly. And so that's where the partnership with the state and the local officials come into play. And Russell alluded to some of those exceptions that you can make for developers, such as density exceptions, in terms of height exceptions, and various other things. Nobody likes to talk about this portion, but maybe the waiver of some fees, some impact fees, just to add some additional incentives. Being a former banker, I realize, former commercial banker, I realize they're trying to achieve their net operating income, and I understand the different components that go into making a project profitable. And so by cutting back on some of those expenses, we may be able to mitigate some revenue loss that they perceive by having the affordable units added to their projects. But we also, I think we're going to talk about the religious institution portion, because I think that also deals with the cost of land issue that keeps coming up too.
Well, some of the other tools we're using as well is, for example, with homes of hope. If we have a pretty strict tree ordinance that can be pretty expensive if you're tearing down or cutting down a lot of trees. We will waive those fees if you're doing affordable, and so we're completely good with doing those kinds of things. The density bonuses are an important tool that we use. Tax breaks. We can also, if the development is a business or has businesses in there, we can waive the business license fees for a period. So there are a lot of things that we can do to incentivize and make it more palatable for our developers. The biggest pushback we're getting on this is from the developers.
Yes. And as you can imagine, developers have quite a bit of influence, not just in our state, but in every state.
Yeah.
But I do understand their concern, because they're in the business to make as much profit as possible. But as I stated at the beginning, it is incumbent upon us to send a message about who our state is. We want you to come, we want you to be profitable, we want you to do what you do, but we also have some immediate needs for our constituents. And we need to make sure that you are a partner in helping us solve our issues, just as we are a partner with you in helping you grow your real estate portfolio. There needs to be some give and take in that. And this needs to be an area that we ask our developers to support our efforts.
I'm good, unless y'all want.
You ready to open it up for? You want to talk about that? Let's talk about the other bill real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So there is another, again, housing is a major part of my platform, and I've got a few bills in there. Just stuck one in there for teachers, but maybe we can come back and talk about that one later. But there's a bill that's been gaining some traction in state that I put up a couple of weeks back. The Religious Institutions Affordable Housing Act. Russell spoke to a few minutes ago about how expensive land is. And so with that being a backdrop, I haven't talked to a couple of my peers about this, came up with the idea of many of our churches, particularly in the county, have ample land that goes unused. And many of our churches have raised their hands to say, hey, we want to be a player in providing a solution to the housing issue. And so what I'm proposing is that, given that land is already deemed tax exempt, so we're not taking money away from the county. What I'm proposing is to allow churches to partner with developers to begin to develop affordable housing on their properties. And as long as the churches retain at least 10% ownership of that project, that property can remain tax exempt. And so now that lowers the cost of construction, that begins to deal with the cost of land. And so it makes it more attractive for developers. The churches can negotiate with the developers as to how much they're going to own, but they need to retain at least 10% of that. And so now we're figuring out a creative way to make that project still attractive to developers because it's eliminating quite a bit of expenses. Now, the one pushback, I'll go ahead and say that I didn't think about this when I wrote it, but I'm ready to throw this amendment in there if we have a hearing. The municipality associations have pushed back in terms of impact fees and things like that. So wanting to add that. And what that's about, guys, is that, you know, if we build this project is going to add an additional drain onto already existing systems, our infrastructure system. And so they want to include the impact fee to help compensate for that. And of course, developers love impact fees, right? No, they don't. But hopefully we can still get past that issue and still begin to make this happen. And the last thing I'll say about this, and I think we'll open it up for questions, is that the reason why I'm so passionate about this is that this approach, if passed, if signed by the governor, allows for speed. We need to turn dirt as quickly as possible because this issue is 22,000 today. We're growing by leaps and bounds, not just every month, but every day. And so that number is going to continue to grow. The typical process for getting tax exemptions and all these various things that our developers have to compete for is a drawn out process. And so if we can put this in place, we can start doing stuff much quicker. And we need speed right now.
Wendell, can you tell us the numbers of the two bills?
I will before we're done, because there's so many numbers running through my head, but I'll look it up real quick.
Okay.
I think just as an example of what works with the churches, the church idea is the development at Augusta Heights. That is, I don't remember how many units it is, but that has been wildly successful, right on Augusta Road. And if we look back at that, that was a very contentious project. The neighborhood of which I'm part of, the neighborhood, I can see it from our house, but the neighborhood fought that. If you talk to the community, when we developed GVL 2040, which is our new comprehensive plan, the number one item on that plan is affordable housing. And the community told us that. Yvonne was heavily involved in that process. However, even though people said, yeah, affordable housing is a good thing, we're all supportive of it, but when we start putting it in people's backyards, we get a lot of pushback. Yeah. So that means there needs to be so much education and a lot of education in the communities about how this is a good thing and how it can work. Using Augusta Heights is a great example of how that can work. So it's a challenge, but you know, we're working on it.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah, please.
And the misinformation in all of that is that people really think that by adding affordable housing, a mixture of affordable housing, that is going to depress their property value.
Quite the opposite.
The data has shown that that is absolutely not true. And so it actually brings up property values. And so we need to be the messengers that put the truth out there. It does not bring property values down.
And one other comment, this is not about inclusionary zoning, but about affordable housing. The city has committed next year $11.5 million to affordable housing. 5 years ago, we committed zero. So I'm really proud of that fact that we have, and a lot of that has been pushed by goal and pushing us to do better. So we have committed $11.5 million. The county hopefully will join in the party. But also there's talk about creating an ordinance that requires 30% of that funding to be to 30% AMI. Quite frankly, we can't legislate that. We can't legislate an ordinance. We could do a resolution maybe, but we can't do an ordinance that says you're required to do 30% AMI. I think it's a goal of ours. We'd like to do that, but we just can't we can't codify it. So
the bill number for the inclusionary zoning is H 4334. H 4334. And for the Religious Institutions Affordable Housing Act, that is 4544.
What's your guess on timing?
I wish I had that. Wish I had that crystal ball. I doubt seriously we'll make any traction this year. We just not concluded with the budget, and so we got some other things that are taking priority. I'll refrain from my editorial comment with that. But I'm still lobbying within the House. Most of my colleagues, Democrat and Republicans, think the bills are good bills. And so we just gotta get the chair people to give us a hearing.
Dave?
I'm curious, Russell, just because you shared the city is kind of doing workaround on inclusionary zoning with all the many things that y'all are doing. I'm curious if this bill were to be passed eventually, what the city, specific things the city could do that they're not doing yet.
What we could do is we could zone neighborhoods, we could zone areas that we cannot do now. Right now, the inclusionary zoning we're doing is property specific. When a development comes up, we can, and we can't mandate, although I don't think your bill mandates either.
No, it allows them to opt out by paying the fee.
Okay. But we can suggest in current developments now. But what that would allow us to do is, for instance, downtown, we can mandate that, not mandate, we can highly suggest that people do inclusionary zoning. So it's more of a bigger area that we can address. And one of the problems within the city is it's really expensive. And there's some places where it may not work. I mean, there's some places in the central business district that probably needs to remain market rate. But if we can convince developers that this kind of mixed income use is good for everybody, it's not just a financial good, but good for the community and good for the people living here, good for our quality of life, then we'll go a long way in accomplishing some of these goals. If someone works in a restaurant downtown, they can't afford to live downtown. And we don't have adequate transportation to get them there. They can't afford to park. Teachers the same way. How many teachers can afford to live near the schools in the city with which they're close to? And so that I love your bill, Wendell. I think it's brilliant what you're doing, especially with the workforce piece of it. And that addresses a lot of problems that we're dealing with.